Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. I'm your host, Bo Richards, and with me is Dan Humphrey.
What's up, everyone?
Today, we are going to talk about Jiu-Jitsu.
Yay!
Probably the most depolarized thing you can do, because it doesn't matter if you're conservative or you're Republican or you're independent or you're communist or Naziist. If you get choked, you're going to fall asleep.
That's right.
So chokes don't give a damn about your politics. So this will be a nice, fun podcast since both Dan and I practice the gentle art.
Yes, sir. That's how we met.
That is exactly, yeah. So let's start, if you would start by explaining your jiu-jitsu journey. If I remember correctly, didn't you get your white belt like over a decade ago? Hasn't it been a long time?
Well over a decade ago. And the white belt's automatic, but my blue belt.
Yeah. I should say you started well over a decade ago.
I think I did my first bit of jiu-jitsu in 1996, either 95 or 96, something like that. My journey has been an interesting one. So shortly after the very first UFC, which I did in fact buy on pay-per-view and watch that and was absolutely blown away, like many people were. That brought up the conversation of jiu-jitsu and grappling, and that was kind of the hot topic at the time. And you got to understand, back then, the landscape of martial arts was so much different, particularly in the United States. That was before anybody really knew, or I should say the general public really knew what was effective, what actually worked. At the time, when the UFC began, it was billed as a contest to see which martial arts were the best and which actually worked. And so it was a test of different styles of martial art. And nobody really knew. Everybody thought that theirs was the best, and they were going to go out and prove it. And lo and behold, a skinny little Brazilian guy shocked the world and choked out a bunch of big dudes.
Yeah, didn't he give up like 60, 70 pounds?
I think it might have been 80 to
80,
7.
yeah, because he was $160.
So, yeah, $160.
Wet and in a gi.
Yeah. Not a big guy at all. So that really opened everybody's eyes. At the time, I was taking a martial art called Kenpo Karate. And of course, like everybody with their own brand of martial arts, we thought it was the best and, super badass and all that. But this grappling thing seemed interesting, so we started to play around with it. We, meaning myself and my brother-in-law. And we got the first round of the Gracie tapes, Hoist, and I think it was Horian and Hoist put out VHS, ladies and gentlemen, VHS tapes showing some of the basics of jiu-jitsu. And my brother-in-law somehow got his hands on an old wrestling mat, like a nasty old wrestling mat that came out of some college somewhere, and we threw that in his garage. We watched the tapes and just kind of messed around. And even just the very, very basics that we got on those tapes were very valuable, to the point that one day we were at a Kenpo class, and again, the martial arts world was all talking about this jiu-jitsu stuff. So my instructor was working in some grappling that I think he had kind of devised on the spot as the UFC came out. It wasn't really part of the traditional Kenpo training. But he integrated some stuff. So we were playing around with grappling in this Kenpo class, and I actually tapped out my instructor. And that was pretty eye-opening for me, because what I learned just from these silly little VHS tapes proved to be genuinely effective against, the person that I thought was invincible. Because when you're taking a traditional martial arts, typically you're going to think that your instructor is invincible, and that's why you're learning from them. So that was kind of a turning point for me. And so kept training in jiu-jitsu. Again, it was still just the VHS tapes in the garage. Finally, my brother-in-law ended up tracking down a purple belt somewhere, I forget where it was, and got a little bit more solid instruction. So we did that for a while. And then again, somehow, Kevin, that's my brother-in-law, got in contact with Marcelo Alonso.
Okay.
And Marcelo Alonso, he still trains in the Seattle area. He's an old school black belt. And at the time, he was the very first black belt in the state of Washington.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
he's currently the highest ranked
Yeah.
black belt in the state.
He's OG for sure.
Yeah.
So we got into his class. I think we were down in Tukwila at the time and trained there for a while. And it was fantastic. And you know, it was old school jiu-jitsu. It's definitely changed a lot, the training methods, and I think mostly for the better. But this was kind of the old school classroom or gym rather, and we learned jiu-jitsu. And then just about the time I was getting my blue belt, I got in a motorcycle accident. It was pretty nasty. Almost lost my leg. I was in Harborview for 8 days. And that definitely took me out of jiu-jitsu for a while since I couldn't walk normally for quite a while. And, you know, it's one of those things that looking back, I'm not sure what exactly triggered it or what the cause was. But for some reason, as I was getting over my leg injury, I really kind of focused more on the gym and the fitness industry. Ended up becoming a personal trainer and a manager of personal trainers and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, made a career out of it for a number of years. And if you ever would ask me during that time, like, hey, have you ever tried this jiu-jitsu stuff? It's like, oh yeah, I train jiu-jitsu. It's just been a while. Mm-hmm. Well, it's just been a while, turned into, I think, 16 years.
Oh my God.
And I was basically telling this very same story to a friend of a friend, and he trains here locally as well, a place called Seatown Sambo. And he invited me to come roll. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. Even though it's, you know, been a super long time, let's go check this out. And you know, fell in love with it again, or maybe for the first time. I really enjoyed it before, but this time it really clicked as something that I needed to make part of my life. And as it turned out, I actually ran into Marcelo. He was doing a guest seminar when I came down, and he recognized me and all that. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So it was very much a welcoming environment to come back into it, even though it had been so long. And I looked around for something a little bit closer to where I was to train. I found Gracie Baja in Kirkland with Professor Cindy Hales, and just started training consistently there for a number of years. Got my purple belt from Cindy. There was a little bit of drama, or maybe a lot of bit of drama that happened at that particular gym. I don't know the details, but Professor Cindy decided to move on from that location and ended up opening her own gym, which was a blessing in disguise, I think, because she's a phenomenal teacher, and you know, now she's got her own place and she's doing quite well, not counting the pandemic, of course. So that was kind of and when that happened, when Kirkland Gracie Baja kind of blew up and people scattered to the winds and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to train, that's when I came over here being Evergreen BJJ in Bothell, Washington, and met you, Bo.
Me.
And trained here for almost a year, I think.
Before the pandemic.
Yep. And then here we are. So that's my long circuitous route through jiu-jitsu. But it was it's always been a part of me, and now I'm glad that I'm actively, you know, part of the jiu-jitsu community again, and eagerly awaiting a chance to actually get back on the mats and train for real.
Oh yeah.
So, how about you?
I have a couple questions first, if I may. Who'd you get your blue belt from?
Got that from Marcelo.
Okay. How long did you train before you got it?
It's probably about a year.
About a year? Okay.
Yeah.
I know it's between 1 and 2 is pretty common, so
Yeah.
depending on the instructor, but
yeah.
And he's a Carlson Gracie black belt.
Correct.
And I know Carlson's very strict with his black belts, and so I would expect Marcelo to also be very strict with how he grades.
Well, you know, funny you mentioned that. So when I started training with Professor Cindy, obviously there's a question of, you know, you got some experience,
Yeah.
So, what was your rank? It's like, well, I got a blue belt, but that's been a long time ago, so we can just go ahead and start over and that'd be just fine. She says, nope. If Marcelo gave you a blue belt, you
You're
are a blue belt.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So I got whooped on by the white belts for a while.
I was going to say, were you kind of a bottom of the rung blue belt?
Ooh, I was a very pale blue belt. Yeah. Yeah. But it's good for the ego. Just go in and train.
And now Cindy Hales, right?
Correct.
With an S, yeah. She is one of the female Dirty Dozen, correct? One of the
That is correct, yes.
First 12 female American black belts.
Yes.
Which is pretty incredible. And so
yeah,
it's interesting because Washington actually does have some pretty deep, some old school jiu-jitsu roots.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Old school martial arts roots.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee lived here.
It's not very big in terms of comparatively to the East Coast, let's say, or in California in terms of like competition and like the number of, absurdly talented black belts. Like obviously New York's got like 5 different schools that are all absurdly world class. And down in San Diego in particular, there's probably half a dozen or 2. They're both the meccas of America for grappling. And then everything else is kind of spread out. And Washington, I don't think has ever been known as like this talent-rich area for jiu-jitsu comparatively, which I would disagree with. Having grappled with quite a few different people from different gyms, I think there's a good amount of talent here. It's just not as, broadly speaking, there's not as many competitive gyms, I think, compared to those cities. And that makes sense because of where people migrated to when they came up from Brazil. But there's some old school martial arts in general, but jiu-jitsu here, Marcelo's been around for a long time. Cindy Hale, one of the first black belts, female black belts. What's his name? Why am I forgetting his name now? Anibal Lobo is a black belt down in Vancouver, Washington.
Okay.
And he was high school friends with Rickson Gracie and Pedro Sauer.
No kidding.
Yes, he was actually considered. If you can actually look it up on like old, there's like old websites that have this information that are no longer valid, but you can look them up on like archived files. He was considered Rickson Gracie's hitman.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's a Brian size, so he's from what I gather, he's like pretty small. He's like maybe like $160, $150, like 5'7", not very big. I think that's what I've heard. But he wasn't a big guy, was the point. And he was one of Rickson's instructors. And for those of you who aren't aware, Rickson Gracie is the son of Helio Gracie, one of the founders of jiu-jitsu, and he's generally considered the like the greatest jiu-jitsu practitioner of all time.
Yep.
He was specifically not chosen to do the UFC, and his younger brother Royce, who was considered the worst of the Gracie brothers, and as well as the youngest, but he was considered the least good. He wasn't picked. Rickson wasn't because they didn't think it would prove anything.
Well, yeah. See, Rickson was a
Vale
much
Tudo
more
guy.
of a physical specimen.
Yeah.
He looked like a fighter.
Oh yeah, he was 5'10", like 190, like 6-pack sculpt, and this other guy, Royce, was pretty thin and like just like an average looking guy. And they wanted to make sure that they chose what they considered to be the least competitive of the brothers to go whoop everybody. So then they'd be like, look, like our stuff actually does work, because Rickson's just an athlete, so he's going to win no matter what.
It's brilliant marketing.
Yeah, but so Anibal was one of his hitmen, if I remember correctly, and because I believe I'm getting that right. It may be another black belt, and I'll have to fact check that after this. But he got his black belt, and then took like a 20-year hiatus. He just I think he actually literally disappeared. Like his family didn't know where he went.
Oh.
I'll have to ask Brian about the history, because it's a pretty crazy history.
Okay.
And then now he's been training and teaching in Vancouver for the last 10 years or so. And he technically should be like a 7th degree black belt, like a coral belt at this point.
Interesting.
But he left for so long and came back. But yeah, there's a lot of old school jiu-jitsu. I think one of Rickson's daughters, I think she trains, or she runs a gym in Yakima, on the east side of the state. And I think every now and again, Rickson's son, why am I blanking on his name right now? Crone, trains over there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so it's not often, but I think he does come up and does seminars and stuff, and I think he helps her give out belts and stuff. I think she's a purple belt.
Okay.
But yeah, I was interesting when I was looking into the history that it's kind of an old school, a lot of old school black belts in the area.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy. And so, and I actually just remembered, so Anibal Lobo wasn't considered the hitman. I take that back. He was just an old school friend of theirs. The hitman for Hickson was oh God, I'm not. He's the Pedro Sauer affiliate in Maui.
I'm not sure who that is.
His nickname's Lemon. I can't remember the rest because I don't know why I'm blanking on his name, but it's Limon, Brazilian for lemon. But I've actually met him. He's a very small guy. He's Brian's size. He actually is like 5'6".
Okay.
But anyway, so yeah, I just thought that was very interesting how much history there was in the state when it came to just the old school style, like jiu-jitsu, the old school self-defense in particular. Like it's very much self-defense oriented in a large number of gyms. I know Gracie Baja in particular sort of pushes away from that a little bit. They're definitely much more of a competitive branch, but
yeah, it's more of a sport jiu-jitsu.
But
and lest we forget, this is modern era, but Demetrius Johnson, the UFC flyweight champion from that division's inception for several years. I forget, I think he had 10 title defenses or something ridiculous. One of the most winning champions ever, and he trains in Kirkland. So yeah, and he trains under Matt Hume.
That's right. Yeah.
Considered the wizard, and he was an older school fighter. He did quite well, but really, really came into his own as a coach.
Yeah.
Absolutely world class. So
that's right. Who's the other one? I couldn't remember his name, so I wasn't going to bring him up. But yeah. Anyways, so my story, mine was not near as long. Like
good.
I've been doing this for just over 4 years. And, it would have been 4 years in May had we not stopped for COVID.
Okay.
Technically speaking, but it started in May of 2016. And mine was started for. I moved to the area to Bothell for work. My work moved from Kenmore up to Bothell, and I was living in Lake City. I didn't want to bus the extra. I didn't have a car. I didn't want to bus the extra 20 or so minutes each way. It was already an hour-long bus ride, depending on traffic, and I had stopped going to the gym as a result because there's not really a gym that's within walking distance in downtown, in like old school Bothell and by Main Street and everything. And so I spent about 2 years not going to the gym, and slowly getting kind of burnt out and crushed by just work shit. And I'd like to give a shout out actually to my girlfriend, because without her, I think I probably would be in a way worse place in my life, because she kind of helped me both want to continue to go to work and do things and come home, and because it was nice to come home to her or to see her when I did before we started living together. And but I definitely got really burnt out and very angry and upset. And my old boss had actually given me a free month plus registration fee for Evergreen. She had won it or bid on it at like an auction through the Bothell Chamber.
Okay.
They were auctioning off a free month plus basically the registration, basically the gi. And I held on to it for 6 months. They auctioned it off in Christmas, and then she won in early December, and then I actually finally went in May. I waited like 6 months to go. I was terrified because I had done about a year of Taekwondo in high school.
Okay.
And
for the listeners, Evergreen is Evergreen BJJ, and that's the school that we met, and we're actually currently sitting in right now recording this podcast.
Correct, and it is both it has 2 schools in it. It has a karate school, I believe it's Shotokan Karate, and then they do the jiu-jitsu and different teachers and stuff for both. And but having done Taekwondo for a year, I was kind of soured by the politics of it and how expensive it was, and I also just didn't really like it. And I knew that karate was for Taekwondo and for karate enthusiasts and practitioners, you're probably going to roll your eyes, but I assumed that they were fairly similar, which I know isn't technically true now, but compared to jiu-jitsu, they're similar. It's similar, like wrestling and jiu-jitsu is similar.
Right.
Or like, jiu-jitsu and sambo are similar, right? There's definitely enough similarities to where you look at them and you're like, oh, okay.
It's a striking art that includes legs.
Exactly, versus a ground art.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. Even if the politics are different, I was like, I don't want to deal with it. And but I looked up what jujitsu was and watched some MMA and was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And so I waited 6 months because I was afraid I was going to come in and just get my ass handed to me by a bunch of meatheads who,
Right.
couldn't wipe their own ass and, had traps that like blocked their ears, just like what the roided out MMA guy you see that's like crazy. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. Even though I never looked at the window and watched like Brian and Sean and a couple of the smaller guys roll and they're like tiny and not mean.
It's a common misconception.
No, very much so. But so I waited 6 months and finally my girlfriend, and again, another shout out to her. She was like, just go do the trial. Like email them, set up a trial. Like you need to go do something, and I often joke that she was like, she privately wanted me to because I was so upset all the time that she was like, get out of the house, like leave me alone. But so I signed up and I went, and I was about 25 pounds heavier than I am now, but I was pretty muscular. I was like really top heavy, and I'd done a lot of lifting for many years and got pretty big up top in particular. And I came in and was like, I'm athletic, even though I haven't done much in a while, and like, oh, this will be fine. Pulled a groin muscle during the warm up, doing side shrimps.
Okay.
And then I had to stretch that out for like 2 years because I would flare up it was like I had a tight inner groin muscle and on my right side in particular. And so a lot of the movements, like I really needed to stretch it. Otherwise it would seize up. And doing that move in particular, the hip switch and all that, the moving the hips just really, really pulled it and hurt to walk home. Like I had to stretch it every day for like 2 weeks before I could walk right. Like it was pretty bad.
Wow.
So I continued to do everything, and I'm matched up with Sean, and I just mentioned a minute ago, Sean's pretty small. He's a small guy. When he competes, he's 135 pounds and 5'6", and he actually does have a little bit of a mean streak to him. And if you don't know him very well, or he doesn't know you very well, he doesn't smile a lot. So we're doing triangles, and because he's partly small, and I have like I had pretty thick shoulders and traps at the time. Like he couldn't really triangle me because his legs aren't very big. Like it was harder, and it was a thicker guy. And so he actually had to like try kind of hard to like actually get the triangles to work. I found this out like a year and a half later when I asked him about this, but at the time he was just trying to make the move work.
Right.
And I was a little too thick for him. But for me, as like never doing this before, this tiny kid who I was sure that I could like curl with one hand and would just like tear in half if I like flexed really hard, was just choking the shit out of me repeatedly with like an angry face. Like he just like would look at me in the eyes as he choked me with his legs and just like make a grimace like I was somehow offending him. And he scared the shit out of me. It took, like I said, it took me a year and a half to ask him or to tell him that story. Like I literally waited till I was like well into my blue belt to tell him that he actually scared the crap out of me when I first met him, because he was so angry and he was choking the crap out of me just like over and over and over. And every time I tried, I'd try and triangle him. I couldn't figure it out, and I was all sweaty, and like my groin already was sore. And then I kept like, needing to use the groin to do the triangle, and then it would like hurt it again, and it was just this shit show. And
mind you, this was just perception. Sean is a very nice guy.
He is very much so. So I am like massively defeated, and I'm not like a hugely egotistical individual, but I'm fairly athletic, and I was like, I could hack this. Like, this isn't a problem. And then I just, afterwards, I like walked home in shame and sweat. And it was May. So it was pretty nice actually out of that day. And I had to walk half a mile home up a hill and part of it. And my legs sore. And, it was just brutal. And I come in, my girlfriend's like, how was it? And I was like, it was fucking terrible. Like, I'm never doing that. I can't believe it. Like, this is the worst thing ever. Like, I'm terrible. I suck. Like, I'm out of shape. I can't believe this tiny guy, like, basically choked the life out of me for an hour. Like, it was just all, I couldn't believe it. And she's like, I'm paraphrasing, but she was like, you need to suck it up and go back. Like, you're not really a quitter. It's never really a thing. Like, you can do this, it's fine. And, so I went back like 2 days later. It was like a Wednesday class. I went back to like a Friday class, and I've been doing at least 3 days a week ever since. And now I teach. So I technically sometimes do 5 days a week of class. It's been 4 years. Once I went back after stretching and trying like the warm-ups at home a little bit, I was just hooked, just completely hooked. Just an immediate, I can't get enough of it. The mental aspects of it too, for me is a big thing, but it was the that's one of 2 times that I've ever had a bad day in jujitsu. Was my first day, and then very shortly after I got my blue belt. But people often talk in jujitsu about like the blue belt blues in particular, like blue beltitis.
Sure. Yep.
Or people will often talk about just in general too, hitting a plateau. I think this happens a lot with like 4-stripe white belts, and then with maybe later like 4-stripe, 3-stripe purple or brown belts where they're getting a little complacent, or they're not having enough challenging matches with people in the gym. But in particular, I know a lot of blue belts quit because of this. They hit a plateau because they're starting to figure stuff out, and then like with anything, you plateau for a bit.
Yep.
I've never had that ever, and I actually don't understand the concept, but within jujitsu, because I'm so excited all the time to do it. But yeah, it was first bad day was day 1, and then the next bad day was the first time I rolled with Brian, our instructor, when I was a blue belt. And it actually was the first time I'd ever rolled with him, interestingly, which I know isn't very common. I'd roll with other guys and gals in the class in our program, and I just hadn't had a chance to roll with him because I usually didn't stay that late because we would roll from like 9 to 10 pretty late at night, and I usually didn't like to stay that late, and so I just never had a chance to do it. And so he's like, okay, well, his other purple and brown belts are like, he's ready for his blue belt, gives me a blue belt, and like that night or like a couple days later, we're rolling, and I'm like, okay, I'm a blue belt. Like I've been doing this for 9-10 months. I've been doing it quite a bit. I think I can do something. Like I'm not holding out hope for a lot, but I do got 20 pounds on the guy. He's not a big guy. Like sure. I should, I know how to, do some escapes and stuff. I should be able to do something. I can at least do a trap and roll if he's mounted me because I'm so much bigger. I have a big bridge. I can bridge him out. Like I can at least do that.
I'm gonna tell you a story about that when you get done.
And my 145-pound instructor demoralized the fuck out of me. I actually remember specifically a moment where he swept me on top, and I knew he was going to sweep me, but I didn't have enough like wherewithal to like stop the sweep. So I had already planned to get up from the sweep before it happened.
Okay.
Because I was like aware of what he was going to do, but I couldn't like react quick enough physically. And so as he does a butterfly sweep, I go to get up, and I'm already thinking about it. And before I have a chance to get up, he had already prepared for the fact I was going to get up, and then just somehow slams me into the ground. And I remember thinking that was the microcosm of the whole entire roll. It was like 6-7 minutes, or I think we did 2 rounds of 6 minutes. Every time I tried to get up, he would somehow manage to just throw me onto the mat and then choke the ever living shit out of me. It happened at least 15 times per round. And I left and was like, why did he give me a blue belt? Like, why? I don't feel like I should be able to do something. Like I couldn't defend anything.
Yeah.
Try and defend a collar choke from the mount. Nope. Couldn't bridge him. Couldn't do nothing. He just choked me. Didn't matter where I put my hands. Try and, move the arm so he couldn't armbar me. Nope. He'd armbar me. Didn't matter. He'd choke me if he couldn't. It was just everything. And it was just one of those things where I was like, I cannot believe this. And so demoralizing. And then I told Sean about it, and he's like, yeah, Brian's been doing this a long time.
Yep.
Get over yourself.
Yep.
And he's like, what you need to do is you need to go roll with a white belt, and you need to choke the crap out of him, and then you'll be fine. Which I actually didn't do that. I usually don't do that sort of thing, but like I just breathed about it for a couple of days and was like, I'm not worthless.
No.
Like I'm gonna be close to it, but I'm not exactly worthless. Like
it's one of the many benefits of jiu-jitsu, I think, is how you are forced to deal with your own ego. And that happens at many, many levels. That's kind of the beauty of it. If you come in as a white belt, new guy, you're athletic, you think you're hot, maybe you're good in the street fights or something like that, you're probably going to have an ego about it. Mm-hmm. Very, very common to see those guys come in. And then someone smaller than them may even have the same color belt. It might be a 3-4 stripe white belt, but they've been doing it for 6, 8, 10 months. Or if you go with someone in one of the colored belts, you're just going to get rolled up. Time and time again, you're going to get choked, you're going to get armbarred, and you're going to feel helpless. And frankly, you are. In that context, you're helpless, regardless of your athleticism. And that can be hard for a lot of people. Occasionally we'll get people that just don't come back because they can't take it.
Yes.
That's kind of a natural filter in jiu-jitsu
What
is
is
if you really
yeah.
have that big of an ego problem, you're not going to want to play.
Eddie Bravo says, he's like, jiu-jitsu is a filter for douchebags.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because the douchebags just won't survive.
Yeah, and to be clear, I want to make a distinction between douchebags and people with ego. There is a difference, but I've yet to meet someone who is a douchebag who doesn't have an ego.
Yeah,
because that in part is necessary, I think, in being a douchebag.
yes,
and
that's typically the first experience for men at least. I've seen women that train jiu-jitsu typically don't have as much problem with ego, which is good for them. But most every guy that comes and trains jiu-jitsu for the first time, you're going to get your ego slapped. And that's part of the process.
It's necessary.
It is necessary. It's a good thing. As uncomfortable as it may be, it is a good thing. And then once you start training for a given period of time, maybe you get your blue belt or something, and you understand that you do know some things now. And if someone who doesn't train, if you roll with them, you will easily control that situation and win. But there are so many levels, the depth of knowledge in jiu-jitsu. So then if you go and roll with a senior person, they're going to do the same thing to you. It's going to feel like, man, I'm a white belt. I got totally dominated. And that doesn't really stop, at least not for a couple decades.
Sure.
And it happens to black belts. You get a black belt who is, by all measures, is a bad mamma jamma. But you roll with an old school black belt, they'll make you feel like a white belt. So your ego is constantly being checked. And I think that's such a wonderful thing. And it's something that really should be embraced. Because once you set that aside, once you genuinely say, okay, I'm not the baddest guy in the room, I'm just here to learn. Once you open yourself up to that, then there is so much to learn. And you can look at it as, rather than, this guy's better than me, it's this guy knows a lot more than I do. And this is a place where I can get that knowledge.
Well, it's also too, I think, this guy's better than me today.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is in part how I look at it a lot of the time is, I'm naturally a very competitive individual. Jiu-jitsu is actually one of the few things that I'm not super competitive with. There are times when I will be, but I've talked to a couple, both Brian and Sean about this, and Trino, in fact, our other black belt. But most things outside of my life, for all of my life, I've been uber competitive. And when I found jiu-jitsu for myself in particular, I learned very quickly that if I am, because I've competed before, not often, but it's not necessarily because I don't want to compete. It's just more other factors, but busy with stuff. But I realized that if I approach jiu-jitsu and try and compete with it, like compete with jiu-jitsu, not compete in jiu-jitsu, but with jiu-jitsu the way that I compete at other things in life, it won't end well for me. And part of that's because of what you're talking about. Like I said, I don't have a huge ego, but there's some ego with competition. You kind of need it to compete.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because you need to be like, I can do this. You have to have the confidence, and that doesn't necessarily mean arrogance or douchebaggery or anything like that. It just means you have to be kind of confident in what you're doing, and there's always so much to learn that I realize that it should, for me, it isn't about competing. It's about learning. And even if I do compete, it has to be about small things, not big things, right? So usually when I grapple, I don't grapple to win. Like the broad scheme of winning. Like I don't grapple necessarily just to choke you. Maybe I do. Sometimes it depends. Mostly I'm trying to do like one thing. Maybe it's I want to work on a certain movement or a certain concept, like framing, that kind of thing. I have to minimize it. Otherwise, what happens is, I think what happens to spazzy white belts, right, is they get too consumed with whatever the end goal is, which usually is like a submission.
Right.
And then the shit hits the fan. And it's like they just go crazy and start doing whatever their subconscious thinks is the best thing to do in the situation, and you get hurt. And it's like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And so I have to be very cognizant of like, I'm going to pick one thing. And if yours in particular is very terrible, It's a horrible mount. You should never do it. And so like when we're rolling, like I know I'm going to get into the bottom of your mount at some point. And so like that's what I focus on is when I get there, how am I going to make space? And so I just kind of slowly go through ways to make space. And if you tap me in the process, I just tap and try again.
Mhm.
I don't think about anything else. I just say, okay, well, bridging's really hard. You have a good mount. It's exceptionally difficult to bridge out of your mount. Like trap and roll is an example. But so I try and focus on how do I get your hips away? How do I get them up? Maybe micro bridging is the better way to do it, or just enough space to turn the hips and kick the butt out, what have you. And so that for me was a good way to like check that ego, is to say, okay, I need to break this down to something a little bit smaller, something that's more attainable than just the broad, I'm going to win.
Right.
Whatever that may be, it's, and that actually helped me with like my personal life and my professional life too. When I was working, doing sales jobs and stuff, like I realized like, cause I was a salesman for a long time, it isn't just about getting the sale. Like it's easier for me to just break it down by the small things that make up a sale, like the call or the email or how the greeting, how you present things.
Right.
And so I would just focus on those. And then my sales like drastically increased like 3 months into doing jujitsu, which was pretty,
Nice.
it was pretty incredible. And so, anyways.
Oh, as if you're at a gym that has any reasonable size, more than a couple of guys training, fear not, there will be plenty of space for you to be competitive.
Yeah.
And it's typically among your peers. If you've been training for a while, you got a blue belt or what have you. If you train with the blue belts that started roughly the same time as you, those guys are your peers, and basically all the same stuff. So there you can really test yourself and get competitive, still in a friendly and loving way. But there's definitely room to push yourself, and it can turn into a test of character, really. But then there's going to be obviously the senior belts that will limit any ego that you may have growing, but also you then have the opportunity to work with some of the lower belts, and that's a great place to try some new stuff. If you're learning a technique and you're still kind of working it out and you're rolling with one of your peers, there's a real good chance you're not going to try it because you really want to win this one and you're not solid on, you just go with the old standards, the stuff that you're good at, and that's often considered your A game. But if you're rolling with the white belts, then you can try some new stuff and you're going to have a lot more leeway. If your technique isn't perfect, you can still kind of work it out.
Right.
So, there's plenty of room to either be competitive or to try new things or to have new things done to you that you've never seen before or you thought you knew how to defend. I mean, you were talking about a trap and roll. There was a point when I was a blue belt that I was working on my trap and roll and I had the timing real good. And for the listeners, if you don't train, the trap and roll is basically if somebody is sitting on top of you, we call that the mount. You block one side of their anatomy, I guess. So basically you take control of one arm and one leg. So say their right arm and their right leg, and then you roll them over. And because they can't put their right arm out or put their left leg out to act as a tripod, you are able to roll them over. And like I said, I was getting pretty good at that. I had my timing down and I was rolling with the black belt, and he basically, I don't know if he gave it to me or just really wasn't concerned about it, but he allowed me to block both of his arms on one side. And I went to roll this man over. And I mean, he's an athletic guy, but he's not super huge. And I just ran into a brick wall. And it taught me very viscerally the levels of even the simple techniques. The trap and roll is a white belt technique, but there are levels to how you can execute it and also how you can defend it.
Yeah.
And with one little weight shift, I could not budge this man.
Yeah.
And that was super eye-opening because, a couple weeks before that, every time I roll, I got a trap and roll going. This is now part of my game.
Yep.
Feeling good about it. And then just, nope, still got a ways to go. But it's good. Again, it keeps your ego in check. And if your ego is in check, then and only then will you really be able to learn new things. So.
Yeah, very true. What is What is your favorite part of jujitsu?
My favorite part of jujitsu, man.
It could be a move. It could be a guard. It could be a mental issue, mental aspect. It could be. It doesn't matter. Physical, mental.
I think man, that's a great question. Probably what I consider mat therapy. And that, let me delve into that a little bit. Let me unpack that to use the parlance of the day.
Critically engage with.
That's right. Um, so mat therapy basically it hints to how much better you feel after you train, and there are a few reasons for that. So jujitsu is very physically demanding, which is good. It's a very good form of exercise and total body exercise, which is great. So there's that. There is also the camaraderie that comes with when you're quite frankly that intimate with somebody. I mean, you're wrestling with another human being, trying to choke each other or dislocate each other's limbs, but at the end, you stop and smile at each other and shake hands and do it again or go do it with somebody else. There's a camaraderie that comes with that really, it requires a level of intensity in the activity. And it's a similar thing to people that train team sports together, like football or something, and they're all working really hard. There's a camaraderie that comes with that. And again, harkening back to what jujitsu does to manage one's ego. If everybody's in that environment, everybody's cool. I have yet to truly meet a douchebag in jujitsu. I've seen them, but they usually get bounced out real quick. But somebody who's actually had any length of time in jujitsu, they're almost guaranteed to be cool. Everybody's super friendly and welcoming. And, if I've gone to other gyms, everybody's super cool about it. So it's a really good group of people to be spending that kind of time with. And then I would also say, particularly in modern day society, just having some form of intense exercise for the mental aspects of it. Meaning, when you train super hard, whether it's jiu-jitsu or weight training or whatever you're doing, how that changes your biochemistry, the release of dopamine. I think those are all really, really essential things for our biology as human beings.
Yes.
As physically easy as everything has become in modern day society, our biology has not evolved past where we had to work really hard every day just to survive, just physicality of what it is to be human. And that's changed so much in the last couple of 100 years that we need to find a way to get that back, just to simply have our bodies and our brains function correctly.
Yeah.
All of which is to say, after a really hard training, typically my mood in general and my outlook on life is so much better. So, mat therapy for me is, how I feel after I train, the physical exercise I get, and the camaraderie of just being around good people and working really hard to learn something new.
I like it. Yeah. I have a short mat therapy story. My old job used to actually be pretty close to the gym here. And again, mentioned earlier, I was very burnout with my job. And I was good at it, but burnout. And I read The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss and then decided to change my entire life very shortly after doing jujitsu. And so I immediately went to my boss and started to ask to work part-time. And then my sales went up when she finally allowed me to do it. Like, it was a good situation for me. I basically kind of brought part of his vision to life.
Nice.
And one Friday, my boss pulls me into the office. At the time, she pulled me into the office and she was like, "I'm going to need you to start working full-time again." And she didn't give me any good reasons why. They weren't, and I was very upset about this because I'd done very well. My sales literally went up like 30%, and thought everything was good. And it had been like a month or two. And so I'm like pissed because I was teaching kids classes, and that's part of the reason I wanted to work part-time, is so I could do kids classes during the day. And so I come in after work on Friday to an open mat we had, and Sean's here, and I'm like just stressed and angry and like really fucking pissed off. And Sean comes in and he's like, hey, what do you want to go over today? And I was like, I'm in a really fucking bad mood, Sean. I've had a really shitty day. What do you think we should learn to help with my shitty day? And he's like, let's roll. So him and I, right now he's a upper level purple belt, and he's always outranked me and always kicked my ass, regardless of his tiny size. And he's like, let's roll. And so we rolled for an hour before class, just straight up we didn't stop. Like
That's a long time, ladies and gentlemen.
It was just straight up for an hour. Like there was no timer. We just rolled until it was time to clean the mats before class started. And I ended up staying I was going to stay for like an hour instead of like 2 or 3. And I'm staying for an additional 2.5 hours and rolled after classes for about half an hour. And I was in such a better mood. Like I came home a little bit later than I wanted and texted my girlfriend and told her, but I came home and she knew I was upset because I had went home before I came back. And I was just all smiles. Like I literally just grappled all of the stress out of my body. And like I slept like a baby, in part because I, grappled for 3.5 hours. But it was one of those things where like whenever I'm having a bad day, like even if I teach kids, you can't really do much with 9-year-olds because you'll kill them, and so hurt them really bad. So you have to be pretty gentle with them, which is fine. But even when I'm stressed out and I'm grappling with the kiddos, still works.
Yeah.
It's like that therapy is real. It's a very sophisticated stress ball. Right.
Well said. Yes. Yes.
Very sophisticated stress ball, very complicated, but yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big mat therapy fan. For me, it's the mental aspect. I like the blending of the mental and the physical.
Yeah.
And so therapy kind of fits into that. But you need some form of physicality to do jujitsu. Right. You don't need a lot of it, but you need some. You need to be able to move to some degree.
Right.
But this sport is much more mental than it is physical, at least for me. And I think for a lot of people. Now, if you're very athletically gifted and you have the patience for the cerebral part of this art, you'll do very well. That's basically what world champions are. They're like absurdly physical specimens, most of them. And they have the fortitude to like get through the mental aspects of this because it's hard.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Marcelo Garcia, who comparatively doesn't look that like that physical of a specimen, even though he is. He just
doesn't look it, but
no. You see most of the guys
grab you.
Yeah, right, exactly. But for him, it's much more cerebral, and he's got his athletic gifts. He doesn't look like he does, but for a lot of them, though, they're just like really good athletes.
Absolutely. I heard a story about Marcelo Garcia. I haven't fact checked this, but no reason to doubt it. He's known for his grip strength.
Yeah.
And somebody gave him one of those grip testers where you squeeze it as hard as you can and tell you got X amount of pounds of pressure on it. He broke it.
I wouldn't doubt that.
Bottomed it out and broke it. So yeah.
And
when it comes to grip.
Yeah, and for people who don't know Marcelo Garcia, he a Brazilian fella. He's considered by many to be the pound for pound greatest grappler, at least for sure of his generation, if not of all time.
Yep.
Like Hickson was a lot bigger. And there are people who actually don't think that Hickson was the best grappler of all time. I think that could be argued. His one of his cousins, Hodger Gracie, is very good and like 40 pounds heavier and 7 inches taller.
Yeah, Hodger's a big dude.
So that'd be interesting to see that fight. But Marcelo, he's 5'7", 5'8", 160 pounds, 170 pounds. He's tree trunk legs. Like he's huge legs. But he's like a lot of the guys, they have diet plans. They work out, they weight lift, 10%, 8% body fat when they show up. They've cut 20 pounds. Marcelo, he only grapples. He doesn't lift weights or anything. He only grapples. And he doesn't really nutrition. He probably eats better when he's, competing, but he's never really mentioned that he has like a strict nutritionist diet. No six pack. Just like he looks like some of the competitions I've seen him, he has a dad bod.
Yeah, he's a very normal looking dude.
Yeah, very normal, and he just has this absurd, like his strength is quite absurd, but just his ability to anticipate and be where he needs to be at all times.
Yeah,
and then also the fact that his choke strength is just something to behold, I guess. But
Yeah, that makes me think of another aspect of jujitsu that I think is very, very healthy, particularly for young men, and that's um, having the experience of someone that you never would have guessed, whether maybe they got a dad bod or they're smaller than you or what have you, getting rolled up by somebody like that, it makes you question your assumptions of everybody.
Yeah.
So when you get to the point where you come into class and you know that all these people that you never would have suspected can roll you up, when you're out in the real world,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, I'm going to be less likely to start anything because you never know. So at least for me, what I found is the more skill that I got, and the quote unquote better I've got in terms of being able to handle myself in a situation, the less likely I am to get into a situation
Yeah.
because you never know.
You just don't.
What if this other guy has been training for 20 years?
Yeah.
Because you can't tell by looking at somebody unless, if they let their cauliflower ears go or something. But other than that, you just never know.
You really do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until the altercation starts.
Exactly.
Though
So,
I will say this, if you did run into somebody in an altercation who had been maybe doing jujitsu for 20 years, you'd probably have a better chance of diffusing the situation between the two of you.
well, he wouldn't start it in the first place.
Yeah.
I think that's the
But
ultimate. I mean, I say that because it gives you the perspective of you never know. But I think the reality when it comes to people that train jujitsu and self-defense,
they're not looking to fight.
exactly. If something is going down and somebody's picking a fight with you and you are required to defend yourself, odds are really, really, really good that person does not know jujitsu because if they did, they wouldn't be out picking fights. So
One of our brown belts, Tom Humphreys, he's a associate math professor at the college Bothell, UW Bothell.
Yep.
He's a math dork.
Yep.
He's dad now, is like his kid's like 9 months old. He's, absurdly inflexible. When you see him like on the street, like he just looks like a math dork. He's got like a beard he needs to trim a little bit. He's got his glasses and just like a normal guy, that is walking around with like a backpack reading a math book. And you're like, oh, it's just a nerd. And then I watch him stretch and he can barely stretch. He can't bring his knees up anywhere. Like he just has no flexibility whatsoever. And yeah, I'm way more athletic than Thomas. Just way more athletic. And like we've even talked about it. Like he just, because he knows, he's like, I'm not an athletic guy. He's like, I don't have flexibility at all. Like flexibility is like the worst thing about me. But you roll with him, and even though he doesn't have flexibility, like he still manages to make everything work.
Yep.
And he fucks you up.
Yeah.
And like having more flexibility would obviously help, but it's like you're right. You just don't know sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up too kind of the adaptability of jujitsu, meaning you don't have to be that type of physical specimen. You do most likely if you want to compete, but to just learn jujitsu for your own self, there are a tremendous amount of limitations that you can work around. You don't need to be the most flexible. You can be a bit overweight. Most likely that situation will improve. But there are big guys, big fat guys that are fantastic at jiu-jitsu. There are people with severe physical limitations that still train. There's a guy, Jean-Jacques Machado, and he's old school. He's been around forever and ever. I think he's a coral belt now.
Oh yeah.
And he was a world champion for a number of years running.
2 or 3.
Yeah. And his one of his hands is basically kind of missing all the fingers, so he's got a thumb and a little pincher type thing going on.
And a pinky.
Yeah, and a pinky. So he can't grab onto your clothing or anything with that hand, and yet he was a world champion because he found a way to adapt that. And then actually the game of jiu-jitsu itself benefited from that because he developed ways to not have to grab onto the clothing, but use his hands as hooks and things like that.
And he was actually quite good at collar chokes too.
Yeah.
Which was, I always felt, I've watched a decent amount of his footage, and he was pretty good at collar chokes, even though it's like pretty hard to grab a collar with just a thumb and I think it's actually half of a pinky, but I'm not sure on that. He doesn't have any of the in 3 middle fingers. But, the adaptations.
Yeah. So it will work for most people. If you think that, you don't want to do jiu-jitsu just because you're not an athletic specimen, not true at all. there is jujitsu for you for sure.
Have you ever grappled with your eyes closed?
Hmm. Quite often, actually.
I started doing that before a couple months before the pandemic. One of our brown belts told me to start doing it, and because I noticed that when he grapples, it's Mark. He'll like stare off into space.
Hmm.
So sometimes he's staring at you, but like you can tell he doesn't see you
Right.
because he's like literally not looking at you. He's just staring off into space, but he doesn't close his eyes. He just kind of drifts off.
Yeah.
And I asked him about it, and he's like, "Just close your eyes and grapple." And that just reaffirmed what I love about the mental aspects of jiu-jitsu so much, because doing this stuff while you see it, you're naturally going to be, until your muscle memory kicks in, you're going to be half a second too slow, because from the time it takes you to understand what you've seen and then to react to it,
Hmm.
right? And so as people get better, then they react as they see, or they actually react to intentionality before you actually see it, right?
Yep.
Technically, I think that's how it works. And so it's why you'll flinch before you actually see something, right?
Hmm.
Because your body will feel that it's there, and then you'll notice it. Um, and that's what it's like to grapple with your eyes closed, right? Is that you have to learn how to feel weight
Hmm.
and movement and intention, and that's my favorite part of jiu-jitsu is the minutia mentally of trying to figure that out.
Oh yeah, dude, big time.
And how that meshes with the physical, because it is all physical. Like it's right, we're doing a physical sport, but how to figure that out and how to understand what's happening to my body, to your body. Like sometimes your breath will give away what you're trying to do, just that alone.
Yep.
Sometimes like the hip switch, like you were talking about being in the mount or being in the bottom of mount, and the black belt, like just move their body a bit, and then you bridge into a wall, and it's like
Hmm.
you really start to figure that out, and then it's like what to do, because
Yeah.
your body's like, oh well, they lowered this side of the hip, so I got to go the other way, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Um,
Well,
that I love.
I was gonna say that particular story, the brick wall story, uh, I would say is very connected to me being sitting here right now, and the reason I say that is, um, that was one of my first experiences with the power of the small details.
Yep.
Um, so I started kind of looking into that, checking out YouTube videos and things, and I came across Pedro Sauer, who is the um, captain of this team, or how would you call that?
He's
It's the
a
Pedro Sauer team, so he's
yeah
the namesake.
he's technically the we're under his foundation.
Yeah,
He's the one
he's
to
the
give
head guy.
he's the one to give Brian his black belt.
He's the OG. He's amazing. But watching some of his videos and going over some of those small details,
Mhm.
and working those into my game, I came to appreciate the value of the quote unquote white belt moves, the very basic stuff, but done at a very high level. So I started focusing on that, and in seeing Pedro Sauer and what he was teaching, and appreciate that so much. When the whole thing with Gracie Baja blew up here, um, I saw this was a Pedro Sauer school, so I definitely wanted to come and check it out, and was so happy that I did.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of different schools of thought, right? I should say there's probably two main schools of thought when it comes to, near as I can tell, when it comes to learning jujitsu. The one is learning new things. So you see this a lot with competitors. They want to learn, they want to kind of be on the cutting edge of what's new,
Mhm.
so that they can throw things at their competitors that their competitors aren't really prepared for.
Right.
You could actually argue, though this isn't actually the case, but you could have made an argument 3 years ago for the Danaher Death Squad for doing this with leg locks. And that isn't what they're actually doing, but because no one else did leg locks 3
Yep.
years ago, they just destroyed everybody in submission only tournaments because no one knew what to do.
Right.
What they actually do is they focus on the fundamentals of every little aspect of submissions and of positions, and then they actively try and exploit the ones that no one are doing right now, because it's a winning strategy. But so there's a bit of a difference. But and then the other more fundamental one that you see is mastering whatever those basics are, and then just doing those forever.
Yep.
Which is what the old school black belts and coral belts and stuff, that's what they preach, because they've been following the Gracie model since the 1920s.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, there's validity in both.
yeah,
If you look back um, when Eddie Bravo fought Hoyler. Eddie Bravo, an American dude, fighting Hoyler Gracie. I want to say this was like 93 or something. And I believe at the time he was the first American guy to beat a Gracie. It was a big, big deal to beat a Gracie,
At
an actual,
ADCC, yeah.
yeah, an actual family member.
And he went on to get third, actually, if I remember right, yeah.
And the way he was able to do that is Eddie Bravo was kind of developing some of his own techniques at the time. Mind you, his fundamentals were still very sound. They have to be. But he had some new stuff, which has become fairly common now. And a bit of it requires some somewhat extreme flexibility. So it's not for everybody. But the point being, he was able to throw some things at Hoyler that Hoyler hadn't seen. And at his own admission, they were tricks. They were techniques that Hoyler didn't know, so he was able to make them work. So there's definitely a value in having a couple tricks up your sleeve that your opponent has not seen. And by the same token, to try to keep abreast of what the latest techniques are, even if you just want to know how they work so that you can defend them.
Yeah.
That's important. But on the flip side, being able to master the very basics. If you look at a guy like Hodger Gracie, he has a very, very, what you would call a basic game. The techniques he uses are the same techniques you're going to learn in your first 6 months of any class. But his ability to execute those with such skill makes him, very, very successful as a competitor. And people will know, his opponents will know what he is doing. They will see the move coming, and they still can't do a thing about it.
He's the only person I've ever seen who has successfully pulled off an armbar from the guard at Worlds. I think it was a semifinals, but I'm pretty sure in a semifinals of like in 2008 or something, in the gi, in like the IBJJF gi World Championships, he armbarred another black belt from the guard. Even though the armbar from the guard, I've never heard any other person on YouTube ever claim that it is useful against anyone who's not a white belt or doesn't train, because you learn how to defend it, and it's actually not that hard to defend it unless they do it well. Exactly. But he's so good at the armbar from the guard that he could still catch a black belt, like not even just a black belt, like a world-class one.
Yeah.
And not to mention, he's also the only person I've ever really seen do a cross collar choke from the mount.
Quite often. Yeah, that's one of his go-tos.
Like he did that for like 6 years.
Yep.
And I remember I was listening to John Danaher talk about this. I forget who he was talking to, but he was talking about this. Because Hodger Gracie has won more world championships than anyone else ever. When you add them all up, it's a lot. And he, gi, no gi, ADCC, doesn't matter. And at one point in like 05 or something, he moved to London and opened up his own gym. And from like 05 to 2008, he won like every tournament. And he just cross-collar choked everyone along the way while training with white and blue belts, because he opened up his own gym in London. All he had is like blue belts to train with. So he managed to not only cross-collar choke people, but then to refine the cross-collar choke so that they couldn't defend it again the next year, because he was grappling the same people.
Right.
While figuring that out with blue belts. And it's like, cross-collar chokes aren't necessarily, like from the mount in particular, they can be kind of tricky to get. And if you have a big enough neck and you just kind of tuck your chin, like they're hard to do.
Yep.
And he's just like, I don't care. And this guy's 6'4", 225 pounds.
He's an athletic dude.
Yeah, and he's athletic, but compared to the other guys he goes against, he's like, he looks kind of gangly compared to him because he's pretty tall. But the guys he's with, they're bull-necked. And they're really athletic and they're huge. And it's like, they know what's coming and they're strong and they're good. And he's like, I'm just going to collar choke you anyways because I don't want to do anything else. You'll never see him invert and try a heel hook. He's just going to do a butterfly sweep to mount, and then he's going to collar choke you.
Yep.
And that's it. He just over and over and over again. And he's like the best in the world at it. He probably still is, even though he hasn't competed in 10 years.
Yeah.
Or not 10, but it's been a couple. But I think the other thing too with like trying new stuff is, at least this is the old school argument here as I can tell. At some point, you're going to get old enough to where you can't do everything.
Correct. Either
because of injuries or just age, right? So inverting can be tough. doing the berimbolo can be difficult, especially if you have neck issues over time, if you get hurt a lot. And so when you're 85, you may not be able to berimbolo anymore. So
not likely.
Yeah. And so it's like at that point, you know, you're in your 70s, 80s, whatever, and you're still mobile. You kind of got to go back to what you can do, which is the basic movements. And if you spend all of your life only doing the new thing, doing the crab guard or the donkey guard or squid guard or whatever the fuck it is Keenan Cornelius is coming out with, you may not be able to do that. But if you just do the basic stuff, you'll just get better and better at it. And that's kind of the old school argument, near as I can tell.
Well, it depends on your goal quite a bit as well. Meaning,
also, yeah.
If you are looking to be competitive at competitions in the sport of jiu-jitsu, and you want to go against, you know, other people that are committing themselves to being good in competition, that's one thing. And there it is going to be important that you're at least aware of what the berimbolo is.
Even if you don't do it, yeah.
Exactly. So you can see him coming and defend. On the flip side, the origins of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I won't say Jiu-Jitsu because actually that goes back to Japan and da-da-da, but when we say Jiu-Jitsu, we mean Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The origins of BJJ are from a self-defense standpoint. So there were no points or refs or any of that. And there was, you know, your opponent might be trying to hit you in the face as well. How are you going to deal with that? And that changes quite a bit. If someone can punch you in the face, then you're probably not going to try and invert. So if your goal is to get good at self-defense, then that may change what it is you want to focus on, because those old school techniques, those were all developed with self-defense in mind.
Correct, yeah.
The newer stuff, which I won't say it's, you know, it's any less relevant, but in the context of a competition, it's one thing. It can be effective and it can win matches. But if without the rule set of a competition, a lot of that is going to be null and void when someone is hammering you in the nose.
Or at least will need to be adapted. And there is a lot that you're just simply not going to want to do. Yeah. Depending on your surroundings. Most of the time, you're not going to want to just go to the ground.
Right.
Immediately and then, you know, try and do some kind of X guard.
Yeah, that's not going to be recommended. So for me, you know, what I want to take away from, you know, aside from all of, you know, the mat therapy and stuff like that, but I definitely want to be able to defend myself if I get in some sort of scuffle in the street. So for myself, I prefer to just focus on the basics.
Yep.
With a couple of exceptions, I naturally have pretty flexible hips. So
Fuck you.
There's a couple items that I'll work in, but even those were developed, you know, kind of the 10th Planet stuff for an MMA context.
Yeah.
So if it's, you know, if someone is allowed to punch me in the face and I can still do this technique, then I consider it valuable, but I'm not really big on going for inversions and berimbolos and things like that. It's just not something I want to spend the time on. And that's another thing is the people that you see on TV, whether it's UFC or BJJ competitions, those athletes are spending way more time on this than I can or even want to. You know, that's their main thing. They're training 5-6 days a week, do it 2 days and all that kind of thing. That's the type of commitment that is required to be successful in that arena. That's fantastic. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I want to get out of jiu-jitsu. I want to be able to come 3, 4, 5 days a week and just have my own training at the hobby level. But at the end of the day, I still want to be able to defend myself. So to that end, I want to focus on the basics. I want to get really, really good at those so that if I have to use them, they'll be applicable.
No, very, very true. I think it's Gordon Ryan, what you were saying about MMA guys working really hard reminds me of Gordon Ryan. He's kind of a polarized figure, at least among competitors, because he talks a lot of shit.
Yep.
And my assumption, just based on things I've seen, is that he does it on purpose. I don't know if he necessarily dislikes everybody. I think he just tries to do it to generate. He's like like promos and stuff. Like, you know, wants to get average. It works, but he also backs it up.
And he backs it up.
But one of the things I've heard him say repeatedly that is that he calls out other competitors for their lack of commitment. And he's like, this is my job. Like, I'm not going to allow, as an example, he always rails against COVID. And he talks a lot of crap about whatever, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. So he lives in New York, and he's like, my job is essential to my lifestyle, so I'm going to train because this is my job. Like, this isn't a hobby for me. It's like I train 7 days a week, and I have a strict diet, and I'm in here 8 hours a day. And he's like, that's why I kick the shit out of everybody, is because they have 2 training sessions a day, 5 days a week. They're training pretty intensely with good people, but then they have a lazy weekend or they take 4 days off. He's like, I don't take a day off. He's like, I was in one day after I won World ADCC. He's like, I was in and I trained, getting ready for whatever's next, even though I've beaten everybody. And he's like, I think that's kind of part of it too, with why jiu-jitsu isn't as big as it could be, is because I think he's right. At least it seems to me that he may be correct in that assumption that the sport would probably be bigger, like MMA is getting bigger, if people trained more.
I think that's just the natural evolution of any kind of world-class competition.
Right, exactly.
If you get someone that is genuinely competitive, I'm a little competitive, but when an actual competitor, I'm not that. But if you are that competitive and you will basically do whatever it takes to win, if that is your primary goal, no matter what, then it's just a race of how much time can you put in, how dedicated can you be, what can you sacrifice to become a better competitor.
Right. And
that's true for any arena, any sports, sales. I mean, like the true high level sales guys, they will forego conscience, sometimes the law, whatever it takes, and put in super, super, super long hours. 60,
70, 80 hours a week.
Yeah. Forego family and relationships, and, just to be number one. And that's their right to do. It's not necessarily a bad thing, unless you're not willing to make those sacrifices, and then it may not be right for you.
Right.
So
I'm much more in your boat. I want to be competent.
Yes.
Whether it's on the street or on the mat, I want to be competent.
Yes.
I'm much more, for me personally, I have much more of the old school mindset. Like I like doing small things. And so the basics are easier for me to think about doing the small concepts, right? Proper framing techniques. I gave up a long time ago trying to think about moves and move sets. Like, this is how you do it. This is, if you get here, you do an arm bar. Like, I stopped doing that a long time ago. It was more of like, in what positions am I looking? What am I trying to do in a given position? And how does that translate to a different position and a different, right? And so, breaking posture is the same almost anywhere. Like, your goal is the same. So what things can I do to break posture everywhere, or cover my own posture, or keep my posture, like all that kind of stuff. And since, I'm still a blue belt, I'm a 4-stripe blue belt. I was actually going to take my purple belt test before COVID happened. Yep. I was scheduled to do it like a week after we closed.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So we were gonna have Pedro out at the end of March. I was gonna take the test before Pedro got here. And then we closed a week before he got here, and then we closed 2 weeks before he got here.
Yeah.
But
I never got my money back for that. I didn't ask for it, so hopefully, if we never get him back out, I can still go to that seminar.
No, you can. Yeah. I control all that stuff, so
okay, cool.
We'll be good. But I when I kind of gave up on the idea of like moves and stuff and started focusing more on concepts a couple years ago, I was like, well, I'm not really good still. I'm 1-2-stripe blue belt, whatever. I'm not very good at doing basic stuff anyways. Like, I'm still a blue belt. So I might as well just try and figure it out with this stuff. And so I just got smashed for another 1.5 years trying to figure out like how to shrimp properly, or why I would even want to shrimp, or like how to frame from the bottom of mount, or how to just not get choked or tap to pressure. And what I found is that as you do that more and more, I just got destroyed by everyone. White belts too, even. They figure some stuff out, and maybe they're bigger than me and it's easy to hold me down or whatever. And I'm trying to figure out one tiny thing. Even though they're like running a rough shot, I'm like, well, I just want to work on the frame. I'm not going to block the choke. I'm just going to work on the frame. Or maybe I'm just going to block the choke and leave the arm on, not really thinking about it, but just try not to get choked. And then all of a sudden I started to get better at all those little things. And then I could get out of mount, the bottom of mount. And then I could escape side control a whole hell of a lot easier. And then everyone's easy to sweep now, or easier, And then all of a sudden, like, I remember one day I just started choking people. All of a sudden my guillotine started to work. I don't know why. but all of a sudden, like, it just fits in the right place, and then everyone just getting the shit choked out of him. And I went over to Sean's current gym, and because he moved gyms, and they're all very competitive over there. We're not a super competitive gym for those who are listening, which is totally fine. We're much more self-defense oriented, and I'm one of the few people who actually does compete, and I've only done it once. But our buddy's new gym, they're very competitive. They're all very, very good, high level. And I used to go over there like every Saturday for their open mats and grapple. So it's nice to get some high level, highly competitive grappling in with their blue, purple, and white and brown belts, and like, and they're all like super nice, and they just fuck me up. Doesn't matter. And they mostly do no gi. A lot of everyone who shows up on Saturdays has no gi, and so it's nice because I don't really know what belt they are. I don't care. I just go and have fun, and I try new things every time I go. I'm like, I want to stick with. I'm only going to enter into leg locks, whole time. That's all I'm going to do because I know I'm well enough to do that, and at least I know most of them well enough to do that. Or I'm only going to try an arm bar, or I'm only gonna be defensive and try and get out of their whatever they're doing on top. And one day I went and I was like, I'm only going to try and guillotine and rear naked choke people. That's it. Just guillotines and rear naked chokes. That's the only submission I'm going to go for. And I'm constantly going to try and be on top. I'm going to bail out, hip heist, come up into stand up and base or whatever, and then stay on top and try and guillotine. And because I started to choke more people here. And I don't think I'd ever actually tapped anyone out there because they're all very good. And I think I tapped 3 or 4 people out there. Ooh. Which isn't really to brag. It's just like, it was like, it started to work. I was like, okay, like not a lot. It might've happened once per round with a couple of different individuals. And usually they tend to run roughshod over me, at least so it feels. And I was like, okay, like, I don't know why, but stuff's fallen into place. And I think it's because I've just been doing the same thing for 6 months, a year. Yeah. And all of a sudden, like, I'm figuring out the minutia and the small details of like where the wrist needs to be, like how high I want it, how deep do I want the elbow, like, where's that little point on my forearm where their neck needs to be so it's uncomfortable, and the chin strap grip, like all that kind of lovely stuff. And that goes back to the mental aspect of it for me. Like that's what keeps me coming back every day. That's why I still train every day by myself, is I'll train small stuff like that with whatever tools I have here to train, I've currently been going over a knee cut pass for like 2 weeks, and I just practice like small little micro movements of the knee cut pass. Nice. Which is basically just like, a squat, like a lunge, right? You could look at it as simple as being a lunge and then go from there. Yeah. And even though it's, obviously it's not a lunge, but movement's similar, and then you just kind of progress from there. And that's what keeps me coming back, is like, how can I make that one tiny movement just a little bit better?
Dude, the magic's in the details.
It is for me in particular. And that's when I got hooked really quickly on that. And it's like, I think that's why I've never had a bad day, is that it's just like, okay, well, if today I wasn't able to make any of that work, then I need to make it simpler. I was trying to do too much, because I think as like a white belt in particular, like, or if you're maybe even as a blue belt, purple belt, you're going up against someone who is better. Maybe it's another brown belt or a black belt. And it's like, I'm only going to work on escaping the mount, which is like a really big concept. It's like, there's a lot of ways you can escape the mount, it's like, that never worked for me. Like, I always found out someone would pass my guard. So like, I'd be rolling with the purple belt and be like, okay, today they're not going to pass my guard. It's like, well, it's not a plan. Like, how are you going to stop them from passing your guard? Because there's like 1,000 ways to pass the guard. Right. And so maybe you just need to focus on, I'm not going to let them touch my feet. That might be a better way. Yeah. They're standing, I'm seated. They don't touch my feet. I don't care if they get to my head, they're not touching my feet. And then it's harder for them to pass the guard. Or I'm never going to allow my knee and my elbow to separate. Yeah. Then it's really hard to pass the guard, because you actually can't really pass the guard if the elbow and the knee don't separate. Yeah. And when I learned that became the new game. It was like, I don't care how good you are, you're not separating my elbow and my knee. Not going to happen. And so that's all I would focus on. And so I got into a lot of turtle because of it, because you just kind of roll over. But it was like, and I learned that from you, because you're actually really good at stopping people from separating your knee and your elbow.
That's kind of flexible, but
but I was like, that's how I want to do that, because maybe I have a hard time stopping someone from passing my guard, or passing my legs, but if they can't get between my knee and my elbow, it's not going to matter anyways.
Exactly. You haven't passed until you get in that space.
Exactly. And so you have to have that space. And so it's like, but then from there, I started to learn new things. And then I would piecemeal them together and be like, okay, well, they're trying to pass, but all they're doing is getting to north-south, but it's not really doing anything for them. And so then I can retain guard, right? I can move a bit, loosen up, and then come back. And then I learn when to break that rule. When can I separate the elbow from the knee, and to like re-guard and things like that.
I had a similar experience with pressure. There's kind of two aspects of pressure. There's physical pressure when you're actually like smushing somebody, and then there's pressure where you're always attacking with different techniques and things like that. But I mean, the actual physical pressure, and that came about the same time when I was discovering Pedro and also looking into like Henry Akins, who was directly under Hickson and Hickson himself. It just, what can I do to absorb space, to rest as much of my body onto you and make you deal with it. And by trying to reduce that space, which is that's a common thing of, no space, no space, no space. The Brazilians will tell you that. So I just focused on that. That was the one thing, like no matter what I'm doing, just reduce space. And it helped virtually everything.
Yeah.
So pick out the small little details to work on and just work on them.
So like I mentioned, I've been training like most every day here, and I'm alone. I'm not breaking the law and training with people, but I have a couple of different like grappling dummies that I use. And one of them's, like a full body. It's like, I think if you stand it straight up, it'd be like 6 feet tall, but it's like bent kneed and it's canvas and it's filled with like cut up, clothes and stuff like that. And then, so it's moderately functional for some things. And then I have it's called a Combat X trainer. It's like a yoga ball, but it's like oddly shaped. There's like tiny little nubs on it. There's 5 nubs on it that kind of sit out like a really fat baby. So they're like tiny arm nubs and then leg nubs, and then there's like a head nub. And if you look at it, you can kind of tell that it looks like a fat baby on its back, or like a fat cat or something, And but it's the size of a yoga ball, and so it's good for balancing. And you can grab the nubs and move them for certain things. And there's things you can't do, like you can't really choke it; it's too big, and it's not really a neck. But I spend most of my time for the last few months like driving as hard as I can and taking up as much space as I can, pressure into both of those things, because they don't tap. They're not human. Like it doesn't hurt them.
Right.
Because that's the big thing is like trying to figure out pressure against someone. You need to do it a lot, because at first you're going to try really hard and you're going to get gassed out.
Well, yeah, it's counterintuitive. Good pressure requires you to relax, and that's the last thing that you want to do.
Exactly.
When you're rolling with somebody.
So what I found people tend to do is they like drive super hard into it, and then they start to learn they can relax. And so because their body gets used to the driving hard, and so it's not as hard for you to do it. You kind of have the stamina to do it, but also like you kind of learn when to relax in the body because the body's moving. And so I'm like, well, if I do this with kids to try and figure out pressure, like they're going to tap super quick because they're kids. And I do it with white belts, it'll work, but like, I don't know if it's good or not because I'm doing it against like brand new students who don't really have any, like, it's just uncomfortable and terrifying. And sometimes it hurts. And so with blue belts, it's a good gauge, but anyone else, it's like, maybe it worked, maybe it doesn't. Like I have to ask everybody. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to do this alone, I'm just going to consistently think about focusing all my weight onto one point and driving. And then as I start to work really hard, I'm going to peel it back a bit, right? Because you need to do that. You need to peel back and relax. But I want to at least know that I'm putting pressure and then relax myself so that I don't burn out. And my hope is that when we come back and we can finally grapple, that I will have turned that into like absurdly good pressure. It probably won't happen. It's probably all in my head, but I'm gonna be very pleased when I just crush everybody. Because I spent the last 6, 8 months, 9 months, however long this is going to go on for, trying to pop a yoga ball with pressure. Like, just doing everything I can to push into it as hard as possible. Yeah. It's my hope that that'll translate into like severe uncomfort for everyone I grapple with, so I can develop that.
Well, I tell you, man, if you can combine those two, if you find if you're driving your shoulder into somebody. If you get the angle right, you're dialed in, you got that pressure, and then physically relax, but still driving that pressure, so you're not super tense. Like, that's mush, what I'm working on. Yeah. But just get that in place, and then it feels weird, but just kind of melt onto the person.
Yeah.
It's relaxing for you, and obviously that's relative.
Yeah.
But you're not burning yourself out. and you feel twice as heavy to the guy in the bottom.
And that's the thing is,
That's the beauty of the whole thing. Like, I'm gonna take a little rest, so I'm gonna make you deal with all my weight while I decide which direction I want to go right now. Yeah,
that's the plan though. Is hoping something like that'll work out, and we shall see. It's better. I assume it's better than doing nothing.
yeah.
That's the hope, at least. I'll just come back way worse than I ever was because it was just like ruined my whole game.
Can't be any worse than me, man.
So I'm curious. You've trained at 3 different gyms throughout your career so far. You've had 3 different instructors, technically.
Yes. Yeah, primarily. I mean, there's been some spot training here and there, but yeah,
Sure.
three primary trainers, yeah.
So what's something that 2 questions. What's something that you look for in a gym before you decide to go to a gym? And what are some similarities that you've seen from the 3 gyms that you've trained at? Because I know about Gracie Baja in general, and then Cindy Hale's version, and then I know a little bit about Marcelo Alonso's place and our place, of course. And they're all vastly different, on the surface. But I'm curious, like what are some of the similarities between them?
I mean, similarity is a good training, for sure. I think if you're assessing a gym, you can figure out a whole lot just from the vibe. And there are some gyms that are good that I probably wouldn't want to train at just because the vibe is different. Maybe they're way more competitive than I want to be, for a few different reasons. I'm just not that committed to a competition lifestyle. But now that I'm getting older, I'm 46.
I was gonna say you're really old.
I need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And if I allow myself to get super competitive, my chance of injury goes way up.
Yep.
And that's not something I'm interested in. There is the way in which the instructor teaches, and that's something I don't hear a whole lot of people talk about, but it's the same reason why the best coaches in any professional sport, basketball or what have you, are not the best players. It's the same reason that John Danaher is famous as a jiu-jitsu coach, but yet he has never personally won a thing in his life.
He's never competed.
Never competed
In jiu-jitsu, yeah.
It's a different skill set to be a great instructor versus a great practitioner of anything. So getting a vibe for who the professor is, how they teach, and just kind of how they are as a person. Everybody can be cool, but you might just gel with somebody better, and that can be valuable. Personally, I look for an emphasis on self-defense, or at least an existence of self-defense training. I find that very valuable, and a lot of competition schools don't even bother with that at all.
Yeah.
And it's, the argument is made, if you can do jiu-jitsu, even competition jiu-jitsu, you'll be able to defend yourself. And that is true. However, there are certain aspects that I think are really important to always keep in mind if you ever plan on using it for self-defense. I've seen plenty of videos where, a street fight's going down and you can tell somebody knows some jiu-jitsu, and they go for a very standard move at completely the wrong time because they're not taking into account somebody's going to punch them in the face, things like that. So
BJ Penn got beat up.
Yeah, but I think he was just drunk.
He was,
he
but
was sticking his chin out, and
my point though is it's like, I mean, even a world champion who's one of the who's a prodigy at jiu-jitsu, got a black belt in 3 years, like, and I think he actually fought a little bit in MMA, didn't he? But maybe he did not, but I know he at least won a world championship.
BJ Penn?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude.
Is he?
He was all over the UFC.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay.
He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. Yeah. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure he was a pretty big
He fought last year.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah, didn't look good, but he did. Yeah.
But I remember seeing that, and it's like, you just never know. You got to be prepared for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't make you invincible. And even, right now, so I have a purple belt in some sort of situation went down and some untrained person tries to get a hold of me. I feel very, very confident that I'm going to come out on top, but it's not a guarantee. And that doesn't mean somebody's not going to throw a haymaker that I don't see coming and just knock me cold out. Knock me out cold. So yeah, it's not magic. It takes hard work, and it takes the focus on the direction that you want to go, whether it's competition or self-defense.
Yeah.
So in terms of assessing a gym, I think, vibe is a big deal. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find any type of McDojo jujitsu, just because it's so easy to find the fakes.
Yeah.
There's so much less of that on versus some of the more traditional martial arts where knowing what we know now, you can watch them train and say, yeah, that's not really going to do you any good in an actual confrontation.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really happen in jiu-jitsu because it's just too easy to test it out.
Yeah. Yeah. You may have a variance from gym to gym in overall talent level or like
Exactly.
technical ability.
Right.
And maybe there is a case to be made that competitive gyms will just naturally have more talent, let's say
Yes.
grappling prowess.
Yes.
In part because they're going harder usually more often, but
Right.
so they're on the mat more usually. So
Mhm.
you're just going to see that because that's the more you're on the mat, the better you're going to be generally, just
Yeah.
naturally. But yeah, it's hard to fake jujitsu.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like I mean, I would be shocked if I could see wrestlers who've done army combatives doing a good job, maybe doing an okay job at faking jujitsu knowledge and making a McDojo gym, just because they have the
Yeah.
ground presence.
Yeah.
And army combatives are going to show some things.
Yeah.
Maybe they spend 3 months in an MMA gym and then call themselves a purple belt and show up somewhere, but it's still going to get found out pretty quickly.
Well, even then, even that level of training is going to be better than what you find at these nonsense old school chi based traditional martial
Oh,
arts.
the death touch shit.
Yeah, no death touch. And that's not to disrespect any of the historical significance or the cultural significance of those arts. It's fantastic. But if your goal is to learn how to actually defend yourself against someone who's trying to hurt you,
Yeah,
then
they've been diluted.
yeah, they've been so far diluted. And that's a great point. Yeah, 3, 4, 500 years ago when some of these arts started, they were super legit, but they also trained really hard and
Yeah.
they beat the crap out of each other for real and a bunch of stuff that you could not do in modern society. You'd get sued out of business. So yeah, they get watered down. They got popularized by the action movies and Bruce Lee and stuff like that. So you got a bunch of crap for a couple of decades. But now that the UFC changed things 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and now we understand. And that's why MMA is MMA. It's mixed martial arts.
Mhm.
There is no one. There is an understanding that you need to know how to be effective on the ground. You need to be effective while you're standing up, and you need to be effective in that transition when someone's either trying to take you to the ground or you're trying to take them.
Well, yeah, and you see people who specialize more in standing striking and then ground games, and they do very well. You know, you'll have guys that aren't as good on the ground but are very good standing who dominate in the MMA, and then they have guys that don't strike very well but can still do very well because their ground game's so strong.
Yeah, I
And
think that's starting to become less and less
It
frequent
is,
with
yeah.
like the specialists.
Yeah.
You really do need to have a well-rounded game. It doesn't mean you're not, particularly talented in one aspect of it, but if you have a hole in your game, if you don't know how to grapple, even if you're the best striker out there,
Yeah.
you're gonna get dumped on your butt and choked out.
No, very true. It's what's going to happen, I think. And I don't watch a lot of MMA, and you can tell just by me not realizing that BJ Penn did MMA for a long time and was in the Hall of Fame. I could have sworn that he did it, but I don't really watch a huge amount of it. But of what I have seen, it wouldn't surprise me at all if you'll start to see it equalize to more of a jack of all trades versus a specialist,
Yeah.
right?
I think that's definitely the direction. I think it's what we've seen for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. And
Yeah.
a lot of times you'll get a specialist that will come in and do fairly well, but obviously you need to work on the other aspects of your game. If you're a grappler, you got to work on your
Yeah.
stand up. And typically at that level, UFC being a world class organization, the people that make it to the top of that, so you're actually seeing them on TV, they make it to the main card. They're going to be very, very dedicated and physically talented athletes.
Yeah.
Which means they're probably going to pick up the other stuff. They'll pick up the striking much faster anyway.
Yeah.
And we've seen that a bunch of times. Somebody come in as strictly a specialist. I mean, Damian Maya, from when he started to now, his stand up has gotten fantastic. Now he's not going to beat some of the best stand up guys,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
comparatively, he's got much better stand up. Khabib Nurmagomedov, same thing. He's known for his crushing wrestling style, and that is pivotal to the fact that he's undefeated. But his stand-up's getting quite a lot better.
Isn't I remember hearing something similar about Ben Askren because he's a wrestler.
Yep.
And his striking's been getting a lot better.
We didn't get to see a whole lot of Ben striking.
Yeah.
He didn't have the best run in the UFC.
Is he done? I know
he's done. He's retired. Yeah. And I haven't seen many of his fights in One Champion. But yeah, he was known as a wrestler, super dedicated, hardworking guy. But if you're going to do MMA, you're going to work on your striking.
He's another one of those odd. He's got a dad bod.
Yes.
And he's had a dad bod since college because I actually like wrestling and I follow a lot of wrestling and stuff. And he was a 4-time finalist, 2-time national champion at Missouri.
Okay.
And really good. Had a dad bod then, but just for whatever reason, like crazy athletic. I watched him once on a YouTube video. He crushed 2 large watermelons with his hands. His squeeze was so strong that he crushed 2 watermelons. But yeah, I remember hearing that his striking had really dramatically improved because you obviously don't strike in wrestling. But it's very interesting how that'll equalize out and you'll have much more of a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
But yeah, the self-defense for me too is very important. That's I didn't actually realize that when I'd started coming here. I didn't know anything about jujitsu, and then I kind of started to slowly learn it. But I much prefer, like, the reason I wanted to do some kind of a martial art is because I was I was genuinely concerned that like maybe one day my girlfriend and I are walking home from getting a few drinks. It's 1 a.m. and we get jumped. I don't know what to do. Like I'm a big guy, or I was bigger than I am obviously now. But even though I'm not very big. It's like, I don't know how to defend myself.
Yeah, it's real.
And I was like, well, I want to do a martial art. And I didn't really want to do karate. And I was like, we'll try jujitsu. Maybe that'll work. And it was here. It was close. Like I said, I used to work across the street. So from the gym. So it made it easy. And then I learned like this thing was designed for exactly what I'm looking for. And then I learned that like choking people is fun and therapeutic.
Yes.
And then I also learned that jiu-jitsu is basically life. That's the other big thing, is it like mirrors so many things in life.
Yes.
And it's very analogous to all the little problems that you go through. I think we mentioned this in a couple of podcasts ago, but life just isn't as hard a lot of the time, most of the time, I would argue, maybe even all of the time, after you've spent an hour getting throttled and smashed and choked and pushed around by someone who is just better than you. Like you have a 240-pound sweaty man crush you into a ground for 7 minutes, 10 minutes, so much so that like afterwards, like the imprint of your body is like left into the mat. And like all of a sudden, like, Becca from work, who's kind of a B, like isn't as big of a problem anymore. Like,
right.
All of a sudden, the other guy that at work that you're, button heads with, having your alpha male contest with, like, it's not really a big deal after you see your own imprint in a mat after getting squished and, you got a little bit of blood coming out of your mouth or whatever, maybe you forgot to tap and you passed out. Like most things in life tend to be a little bit less of a problem after you have a good training session and, which I really appreciate. It's nice to just come in and, like you said, mat therapy, right? You just, even if you have a shitty role, even if you're not doing very good, like by standards of whatever that would be, like you're passing guards or getting submissions, even if you're just getting your ass kicked, it's like the therapy's still there.
Yep.
It's therapy win or lose, right? You're all of a sudden problems are not near as big of a problem anymore.
Turns them down. To anybody old enough to have seen Fight Club,
although
a bit dramatized, they had the right idea.
No, right, exactly.
Turns down all your problems.
It really, really, really does. They kind of delve more into the nihilism than I would, but a little bit in the destruction of society. But I definitely think that there's something to be said for that. And in fact, that's like, I said I teach and stuff, and if I had my way, I would continue to do this for the rest of my life. Like, didn't get paid to do it. Like, I have no intentions of leaving.
Yeah.
And so that would be the ultimate goal, is just to do it forever. Or as long as, humanly possible, right? That would kind of be the plan.
Heck yeah. I mean, you're helping people. You're giving them not exactly a gift because you got to earn it, but you're giving something. You're giving people something that can literally change their lives.
Mhm.
So you can impact a lot of people in really good ways.
You would mentioned camaraderie and like intimacy with grappling, and one of the things I thought was very interesting is there's like a level of intimacy with people you roll with that you literally, I don't think you get with anyone else. And that includes like a spouse.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a different kind of intimacy, of course, unless you and your spouse grapple together. And even then it's still different than any other kind of spousal intimacy. But I don't know. I've never found a better way to get to know somebody than to grapple with them.
Well,
personally.
the thing about that, I agree 100%. The thing about that is if you want to get to know somebody, you have to test them, and that includes yourself. You want to get to know yourself, you got to test yourself. And one of the biggest tests is at what point do you quit?
Yeah.
And I guarantee you're going to be put in a position where you want to quit. You also get put in positions where you have to quit, but you'll be put in positions where you want to quit, but you can keep going if you choose to. And being able to recognize that and work through that and reconcile that with yourself, wherever it is you land on that spectrum. And then to have that same experience with the other person.
Yeah.
You're trying to make them quit. And they're trying to make you quit. And you see that, man, they're not quitting. This guy's tough.
Yeah.
And you try to put it on them. And you get to know a person's character so much faster than any other way.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed.
A 5-minute roll will teach you more about somebody's character
than anything else.
Knowing them for years.
Yeah, it's their character and their personality. What I found, and we're a pretty small gym comparatively. From what I understand, Gracie Baja, Kirkland was pretty big.
It's good size, yeah.
I think, since I've been here, we've had around 100 students, and that includes the kids. And it was a little bit bigger before I joined, but like maybe a year or so before. But we probably have about 50 to 65 adults. So it's a pretty small adult class.
Yeah.
An average gym is probably gonna have 100 to 200, right?
Right.
And some of the bigger ones might have 4 or 5. At Henzo's, where John Danaher trains, has got like 3,000 or some absurd, right? But we've still gone through a lot of students. A lot of people have come through. I've probably seen 300-400 students come through in the last 4 years, maybe more. And we have 5 purple belts, right? And all of them have been here, with the exception of you, since I've been here, right?
Nice.
So as of yet, no one has earned a purple belt since I've been here. Maybe Wang has, but I think actually, but Wang was here when I started. Yeah. And then he got his purple belt, as did Sean. But, no one started since I've been started and gotten a purple. Like, it's hard, and I've only seen a few blue belts since I've started, get a blue belt since I've been here.
Yeah.
But I've still grappled with a lot of people, and it's shocking to me the number of people that I've grappled with where their character and personality when they grapple is vastly different than who they are when I talk to them. And it's like very apparent to me. And the other thing that's very apparent to me is that, or at least it seems, this is my hypothesis, is that, the people who stick around are the ones who can reconcile the difference between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are. I think that's the case. I think that as part of the transformation and making this wanting to find whatever the end of jiu-jitsu is, even though there isn't probably technically an end, but wanting to get whatever your goal is at the end of the tunnel, the rainbow, as it were. I think it's necessary. Let's say if you want to get a black belt, you have to reconcile who you are with who you present yourself to the world.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, I don't know. Actually, my hypothesis is that you actually can't do jiu-jitsu. Like, you can't continue to do it. I actually don't see, because of what we've been talking about, how someone can live through what it is that we do every day with that discrepancy.
I don't see how you could. I mean, I always say there's truth on the mats.
Yeah.
And that just means you can't fake any of it.
No. And that's what I mean, is that there's an incongruency between like how you present yourself when you're talking, and whether you're talking to people and you're just having a lot of bravado, or you're like saying things are true that you maybe don't believe, which people do all the time. It's actually extremely common. But when you're on the mat and you're not talking, you're just rolling. Like none of that matters. None of it. And you can feel you can feel the personality. You can feel the character of an individual and how they move, what they attempt to do, how they do it, their reactions to things, whether it's like vocal reactions like grunting or yelling or laughing, all that kind of stuff is like. And if there's an incongruency between those two things, like I think as a person, you have to you're going to know it, and then you have to reconcile it.
Yeah.
Right. If if you're a very proud individual and you're always boasting about whatever conquest you should boast about, some victory in your life, and that you're on the mat and you're always getting destroyed, and that character is just being slowly beaten down and reformed, there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect, especially if you're lying about those conquests, right? And that's really the thing. Maybe you have them and you lose here, and that's fine. It'll be consistent, but you'll be able to tell the character difference there between someone who lies about doing things that they don't actually do. You get on the mat and like all of that's kind of laid bare.
Yep.
And I remember when I first started to realize that I could pick up on individual character and personality from people. It was a very surreal feeling to me. I noticed it with Sean because of all the people in our gym, he's the one I've grappled with the most. And I've grappled with him way more than anyone else. And it was about a year into my blue belt. I just started to get a feel. I was starting to really kind of get a feel for what my body wanted to do. And so I stopped getting hurt doing simple movements. Like when I first started with a white belt and into blue belt, I'd do a knee cut pass, and I would tweak my knee because like my hips wouldn't be lined up with my knee.
Yeah.
Right. So my hips would be facing you and my knee would be going to the left or the right. And then it'd get caught in the quarter guard and I'd tweak my knee, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So once I started to figure that stuff out, and I don't do anymore, my knee doesn't get hurt. I started to feel, the other person's body and their connection and how we're moving together. And then I started to branch off into trying to figure that stuff out. And I started to feel his personality as he grappled. And that's the moment when I realized that he wasn't angry all the time and didn't like everybody. He was actually a nice person.
Yeah. You
just had to get to know him.
Yep.
Because he's like I said, he doesn't smile a lot if you don't know him. And so I just thought he was just angry short guy. And he scared me. And then, but that moment I started to realize, no, not only is he like obsessed with and loves jujitsu, and it's like an integral part of his life, but he's like a very genuine and passionate individual.
Yes.
And it comes out in his rolling. When you roll with him, he rolls very passionately.
Yeah.
And you can actually like feel his intentionality and his movements increase and decrease with his emotion as he gets into the roll. If he gets to a point where he's getting a little frustrated, you can actually feel him pick up his pace before he does it, because you can feel the emotion in him like pick up, and you're like, fuck, he's going to explode.
Yep.
Because he's getting a little angry because you're like holding him down. He doesn't like it or whatever, And whenever I watch him roll, I'll see like a white belt like hit him in the face or something. It'll bother him. And I'm like, in a second here, he's just going to go on a rampage for like 20 seconds and just pass the guard and choke him and then do it again.
Tapping in 5.
Yeah,
4,
right, exactly.
3.
You could just tell by his mannerisms. And I think people exude that character and that personality from their bodies. Like it's a physical manifestation of it. And I don't think that as a society, we pay attention to that enough.
No, well, we don't challenge ourselves enough. I think.
No, right, exactly, yeah, and which is unfortunate because it makes us as a culture a very, very bad judges of character.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to judge character if you're never stress test like that.
Exactly. Yes.
And
yeah, if you can put filters on your Instagram selfies, that is the exact opposite of what is going to teach you someone's genuine character and your own to learn about yourself. Okay, well, we could probably wrap this up, although I do want to give a message to anybody that doesn't train jiu-jitsu but's thinking about it.
Do it.
Or maybe you're not even thinking about it.
Do it anyways.
But if you made it this far, if you listen to this whole thing, and you heard us talk about how much we love jiu-jitsu and some of the competitive aspects and things like that, I would say look at jiu-jitsu from the standpoint that it really is for virtually anybody. I say virtually. Of course, there's going to be some exceptions. However, just because you don't want to be a competitor or you're not looking to be an MMA fighter or whatever, whether you're a man or a woman, I think jiu-jitsu will surprise you in how much it has to offer. You will most likely make some of the best friends you've ever had in your entire life because you will get to know their true character and they will
Yeah.
get to know yours, and you will suffer together, which is a common way to bond with another human being.
Yeah.
Um, and most likely you're going to find some smart friends as well, because it may seem like jujitsu would be a meathead type of activity. Oh, you want to be a cage fighter or something like that. The reality is most of the people that are attracted to jujitsu
Very cerebral.
they are cerebral, because as physically demanding as jujitsu is, it is way more intellectually demanding.
Yes.
It's high speed chess with 1,000 different pieces. There's so much going on. That's part of the mat therapy, in that you don't have room to worry about your bills or any of that kind of stuff. You are 100% fully engaged in the activity, and there are mental and also biological rewards that happen when you do that. And that holds for any activity that requires you to give it your 100% focus, get into quote unquote the zone. And that's really what that is when you find yourself in a position that you're doing something that is very demanding, it's difficult, and yet you know that you are capable of doing it. And that could be anything from, extreme stuff like skydiving or driving fast, or, giving a really challenging presentation or a talk if you're a professor. I mean, so many walks of life. But if something is incredibly difficult and yet you can, if you give it your all, you can complete that task, then that's going to put you in the zone, and that will be incredibly rewarding. And jiu-jitsu 100% fits that bill. To boot, it is the real deal. It is genuinely effective. So particularly for the ladies, if you are at all interested in some form of self-defense, I would say check out jiu-jitsu and give it an honest shot, because particularly if you are worried about defending yourself against a man, if they're going to try to be, sexually aggressive or something like that, they're probably going to try and get a hold of you. And to know what to do in that situation, to be able to use your legs and the strongest parts of your body against them in a way that will have you succeed, and potentially choke them out or break an arm or whatever it is, you will stay safe. That's incredibly valuable. I mean, bear in mind the typically considered the originator of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Helio Gracie. He was 125 pounds. He was a small guy, and he was taking challenges from anyone. No weight classes or anything like that back then, and he was very successful. All of which is to say, jiu-jitsu is very effective against people that are larger than you. It teaches you many principles of leverage and ways to use the strongest parts of your body against the weakest parts of somebody else's body, and it just plain works. And not only do we tell you it works, but you will discover for yourself that it works. It will be pressure tested, and when you know something, you will know that you know it, because you can do it regardless of whether or not your training partner is trying to let you do it. So it's effective, it's tremendous fun, it's great exercise. The community, the jiu-jitsu community is fantastic. They're all good people. It's definitely, it has the potential to be a life-changing experience in a very positive way. So that's my mini jiu-jitsu commercial.
I like it. I would add a few things too. So jiu-jitsu is, we mentioned jiu-jitsu, it's kind of like life. Jiu-jitsu is simulated death. Like, it is actually like the whole purpose of, like, if I choke you and you don't tap and I continue and you pass out and I continue to hold the choke, you will eventually die. Right? That's very real. If I attempt to break your arm and you don't tap and I keep going, you won't have an arm anymore. They might have to actually be taken off, like, depending on how bad I turn, right? Like,
Sure.
You may just lose an arm. It's just too much damage. Like, it's very real. So you tap, you start over. You tap, you start over. It's simulated death, right? And that's how life is. That's actually how humans literally think this way. We actually developed our consciousness in part to do this, so that we would stop actually dying as we evolved over millions of years, right? Because otherwise, our proto ancestors in trees would jump down out of a tree, get bit by a snake, and then if they didn't develop a way to understand where the snake was or where the snake lived, then they would always just jump down, get bit by a snake, and then the cycle would repeat. And so, and obviously I'm being pretty broad about this, and there are other theories on how consciousness evolved, but one of the prevailing theories is that this is exactly what happened. Over time, our tree-dwelling ancestors determined that, well, maybe the snake comes from over there, so I'm going to meet it over there instead of at the bottom of the tree, and then I'm going to kill it. And then it got further and further. You learn more into the future, and then you could think about it so that you didn't die. That's all we're doing, is I'm thinking about what to do, and then if I die, tap, and then I start over again and I do it again. And that's how we do life. We think through things in our life, like, should I take a left at this turn, or should I wait? Should I say this to my boss, or should I say something else? What happens if I do? If I ask somebody out, how is it going to go? And then I think through all the things in my head, and then I try and pick what seems to be the right one. It's all jujitsu. So that's the first thing. I think it's a very valuable lesson to learn. If you can do that physically and mentally all of the time, you'll be a better person for it, because it'll be second nature. Mm-hmm. The other thing, and it's kind of overlaps with this, is this notion of synchronicity in the body. Jordan Peterson actually talks a lot about this in a good number of his class lectures, and then in some of the lectures he does in like big halls with thousands of people. But he talks about this synchronicity between like all of the internal parts of your body, like your physical body, your psychological body, your soul, your mind. They all kind of come into a harmonious synchronicity. He says you mostly see this when you listen to a particularly beautiful part of music, or you see something very truly great happen in a sports event, and it makes your body tingle, and you're kind of in a euphoric high. That's that synchronicity. Everything's kind of coming into place. And I actually find that this happens to me a lot more now than I've ever noticed in my life, just from doing jujitsu. Because, and in part because I have to be honest with myself all of the time. Because if I'm not, when I do jujitsu, everything goes bad for me. Because what I'm doing on the mat isn't in synchronicity with what I do in real life. Which is, I've always been a very honest person, and I've been much more honest now than I've ever been in my whole life, in part because I have to be. I don't see another way to live my life because I do jujitsu. And so I would say that if anyone who's interested in living a more honest, authentic life, and anyone who's interested in mythology, archetypes, psychology, in becoming a better person mentally, physically, whatever, all of this stuff just maps onto itself. And it comes into place for you as you do jujitsu. And I've yet to find a better way to organize my life that doesn't make me stressed or anxious or upset or feel like I'm not being true to myself, because I have to be, right? I'm exactly the same person in this room on the mat when I grapple as I am at home with my girlfriend, with her parents, with people that from jujitsu or friends outside of jujitsu, when I meet with them, as I am with my parents, as I am with my family. Like, I'm no different.
So you're putting your parents in a front headlock? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So like everyone gets choked the same. Like, I don't care. But like my personality and how I act is exactly the same. There's no difference for me. I don't put a front on at all. Like, I don't. Some people can actually do that. I can't. I don't know how to do it. And I blame jujitsu for that, but I blame jujitsu in a good way. In part, I blame, say, someone like Jordan Peterson for talking about this and really making me realize that what this was mentally for me. But there's so much overlap for me that for anyone who's like me, who's having that issue and isn't sure like what the right path is for them, or is trying to find it and it's hard and wants to be more authentic, do this, or at least do something like this, because if you can figure this part out and you can synchronize it with how you feel mentally, you will become a better person. You'll become a more authentic, honest, truthful individual, and your life will just get drastically better. I'm not saying you'll wake up with $1 million, but the overall happiness and contentedness of your life will dramatically change. People who you'd never really liked and are kind of a drain on your existence will just go away. People who love you and you love will be happier to be around you, and it'll make your life improve because their life will improve. You'll repair relationships with your family. You'll learn how to choke people. Like, it's just a good thing. It just all in all, I can't recommend it enough. And if you have kids, hopefully we don't have kids listening to this podcast because we cuss a lot. But if you have kids, we don't cuss when we teach, and bring them into class. And so, because the kids should do this too. It's a great.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's great for socialization,
Yes.
body awareness, self-defense.
Well, do you want to prevent bullying? Teach kids how to fight, and that sounds counterintuitive. I know Joe Rogan's harped on this a lot.
Yeah,
but it's true.
it is.
It's not just the ability to handle yourself if you need to, but the humility that comes with the process of learning how to do that.
Yeah,
just calms everybody down.
it does. It really does.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is to watch some of our a little bit more cocky youth kids, boys, 10, 12, 13, and they're little shitheads sometimes, and I love them, but they're little cocky little sons of guns, and they'll we have the little boys and the girls grapple together. We don't care, and they'll think that they're gonna they're gonna win. It happens a lot with like new boys come in, don't understand, and
Sure.
they're bigger than the girls because maybe they've started at puberty and the girls haven't or whatever, and then or they know and they still think that they're gonna dominate, and then our smaller girls will just destroy them, just throw them to the ground and choke them and armbar them like they're nothing.
Yes.
And it's just so fun to watch. Like the number of times I've had boys be like, "Oh, this is going to be an easy grappling match or easy game," and then the girl just I'm like, "You got this." And then one of the girls will just grab him and throw him to the ground and like apply a choke really fast and just kind of whistle as they walk to the wall. Like,
true, man.
This is easy for me too.
Yep. Ladies, women beat men all the time.
Oh yeah,
but
it's definitely something that I recommend everyone do. It literally changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I shudder to think of the man that I would be today without having discovered and done jiu-jitsu. Like, I actually don't know. I probably would be single, honestly, and living alone and very depressed.
Sure.
As an individual, and maybe not. Maybe my girlfriend refused to leave me. I like to think that might be the case, but I just wasn't a happy individual, and I didn't know how to get out of that rut. I hated my job and all those kinds of things, and there was so many things that I had questioned in my life since I was like 6. I'm a very cerebral person, so I've just had questions running through my mind for my whole life, and jiu-jitsu kind of helped me answer all of those questions. I had helped, like I said, I talked about Jordan Peterson. There's a lot of other people that I'd help with that I listened to, but it really helped kind of put all those into perspective, right? And I think that this sport or this art could fix anybody in that regard. I think that this should, honestly, I would, if I was a therapist or a psychologist, I would prescribe jiu-jitsu to my patients as a way to get over whatever trauma they have.
Yep, I agree. And I think on the medical side of things, first and foremost is any type of intense physical exercise has been shown scientifically to be just as effective as antidepressants.
Yep.
So there's that part. That's really good. That's a biochemical answer to people that are struggling with depression. It's not a cure-all. Please don't hear anything we're not saying. But it would be the best place to start because it's not filling your body full of chemicals.
Yep.
But then also, all the rest of the things that we said in terms of community, camaraderie, the cerebral nature of it, the accomplishment that when you are successful, say you tap somebody out, that that was real and you really did that and you're getting better. All of those things are incredibly beneficial, both physically and mentally.
Yeah. Lack of judgment.
Yep.
There's I've been to half a dozen gyms, and no judgment.
Oh no. Yeah. I can't think of any bad gyms. I can think of gyms that are a bit more intense than is appropriate for me right now, or they're super competitive. But yeah, everybody's always cool. It's a family. It really is. If someone finds out you train jiu-jitsu and they also train, you're instantly in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good thing for sure.
No, and I enjoy that, you and I, obviously on our podcast, free speech is a really big component for the two of us. And we like challenging ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We both like to challenge ideas, and we like ideas that are challenging, right? So to make that clear, because we like both. And we also, even if we disagree or maybe don't personally enjoy ideas that are uncouth, let's say, or bad, whether it's because of the times or they're just terrible ideas, we're still willing to entertain those ideas. I don't really judge with that kind of stuff. There are ideas I wish didn't exist, but they exist, and so we're willing to, at least to some degree, discuss those if it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really like about jujitsu is that there's a similar lack of judgment. Like you get tapped, no one's like, oh, bottom of the pecking order for you, you're a loser.
Oh yeah, no,
That doesn't happen. Like, and
No.
additionally, we talk a lot after class, and people have very different ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't matter. I don't care who you are. You got on the mat, you're still going to pass out if I choke you. It doesn't, like I said at the top of this, like, it doesn't matter to me if I'm grappling with someone who's a legitimate communist who wants to reinstitute Stalin's regime. If I choke that person, he's still going to pass out. So it doesn't matter to me what he believes. What matters to me is how well he can defend my choke, or if he understands what a heel hook is. Because if he doesn't, I'm going to heel hook him. And there's a certain amount of comfort in that. There's some danger in that too, because then you could possibly get a situation where there's a lot of really bad ideas in a room. But given the nature of how this art functions, what matters is your ability to compose yourself on the mat. That's what actually matters.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes with that incongruency between what you show the world and what your character is, right? Is you have to figure that out. You have to flatten that ego and be real with yourself. You can do that on a mat. You'll be accepted by anyone. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
And they'll be willing to listen to you off the mat, even if they disagree. I would charge that anyone who does jujitsu is willing to listen to most any idea, even if they hate it. They might tell you they hate it, but you learn how to accept those things because of how real and raw this sport is, this art is. And it, like you said, it makes you a much more humble individual, and your aggression levels just decrease. Like you go into situations and you don't fire off.
Yeah.
Right. You're willing to you're able to handle it in a much more relaxed manner. And it's just overall, I think, good for everybody.
Which is typically a byproduct of confidence and not fear.
Exactly.
You will go from being afraid and therefore potentially, trying to put on a show of aggression or, whatever the situation is when you feel scared.
Spazzy white belt.
Yeah. To being genuinely confident, but understanding that, hey, you may not know the full situation. So you'll be humble as well, and just calm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So find a gym near you or find a couple, go check them out, see which one vibes with you. And I would say give jiu-jitsu a shot. It might just change your life.
And with that, everybody, episode 5 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. Have a good rest of the day.
Take care.